Today, let's solve Leetcode 27, remove elements. So the question says that, given an integer array nums and an integer value, remove all occurrences of value in nums in place, and we are supposed to do that in place. The order of the elements may be changed. Then we should also return a number of elements in nums which are not equal to val. Now, consider the number of elements in nums which are not equal to val to be k. To get an accepted answer, we need to do the following things. We need to change the array of nums such that the first k elements contain the elements which are not equal to val. The size of nums is not important. The number of elements in num itself is not important. But we want the first k element to be the elements that are not equal to the value that is given. Then we should also return k. So here is an example input where nums is equal to 3, 2, 2, 3. And the value that we are supposed to remove is 3. For the output, we return 2 as the value of k, which means that the first two elements in the modified version of nums would not be equal to the value that is given over here. So the first two elements in here are not equal to 3. The rest we don't really care about. The size of nums we'd also care about. This question itself is a bit tricky, so you have to read it like twice to really understand what they want you to do. Now, one thing we need to make sure we take notice of is that even though the question talks about removing elements, it doesn't mean that we should actually remove the elements from the nums array that is given. So let's take this as an example. The goal is to make sure that we modify the nums list in place such that the first k elements are not equal to the value that we want to remove. Now, this means that we can move all the elements in nums that are equal to the value that is given to the end of this list that is given. So we go through this, and if we see 2, we move it to the end. If we see 2, we move it to the end. And if we were able to successfully move all the elements in nums that are equal to val to the end of this list, then we would modify this nums array in place such that the first set of elements would be the ones that are not equal to val, and the rest would be the ones that are equal to val. Then after that, all we need to do to actually get the k is to count the elements from the beginning to the point where we have that repetition at the end of the list. Yes, so for this particular example, we can do that by swapping all the 2's that we have with values at the end that are not equal to 2. We need to ensure that the elements that we are swapping with at the end is not equal to 2. So for this example, we can first swap the 2 with the 4 at the end. And then once we are done with this will be the current state of nums. And then the next thing that we need to do is to what? Swap this next 2 as well with the value at the end that is not equal to 2. And in this case, it will be what? 0. So we swap these 2 and 0, and then we end up having 0, 1, 4. Then the 2 will now change to 0, and then the 3, and then the rest would continue to be the rest of the 2's. So once we are able to do this swapping, we can see that the array of nums would turn into a form such that the first set of elements are the ones that are not equal to 2, and the rest are equal to 2. So all we have to do at this point is to basically count the number of elements from this point to the point when we reach like this repetition at the end. So we can start by defining some indices that we are going to be working with. Let's take the number of elements in nums as n. This means that we can define an initial index I to be equal to 0. And then we can define another index j to be equal to what? N minus 1. This is basically supposed to be a pointer to the end of the list, the one that we would be swapping the elements with. Now, how exactly are we going to do the swapping? We are going to use a while loop to go through all the elements one by one and then swap with the end if it is equal to value. So while I is less than n and I is less than j. The reason why we are doing this is to make sure that we don't go overboard. We don't go over the number of elements in n, and then we also make sure that I and j don't cross, because if I and j cross, then it means that we already done swapping. Now here, once we are going through the element, we do two things. We first check to see if the current number that we are on, so the nums at I, is equal to the value that we want to swap, or the value that we don't want in our list. So if this is the case, we want to do the swapping. Else, if this is not the case, we just want to move to the next item. Now, how do we actually do the swapping when the current number we are on is equal to the value? Well, I did mention that we have to make sure that the element we are swapping with, which is the element at j, that element is not equal to the value as well. So what we need to do is to check if nums at j, the one that we want to swap with, is not equal to the value. This means that we can safely swap. So how do we do that swapping? We do the swapping by doing what? Nums at I, comma, nums at j is now equal to what? Nums at j, comma, nums at I. So by doing this, we swap two elements in Python. And once we are done swapping, we want to move to the next element by incrementing the I, right? And because we have swapped, it means that the current j that we are pointing to is actually equal to the value that we don't want. So we can reduce that. We can do j minus equals 1. And by reducing j, we are moving it to an element that is possibly not equal to the value. I mean, we still don't know, but we are sure that the one that we are currently on is definitely equal to the value because we have done the swapping. Now, if it is the case that the current j that we are on is actually equal to the value, which means that this condition is false, we want to also reduce the j by 1 so that we move to an element that is possibly not going to be the same as the value. So now you can see that we do this same thing regardless of the condition. So we can remove these two and just write j minus equals 1 here. Now once we are done with this while loop, the swapping should be done to the end of the nums array that we have been given. So from here, all we want to do is to count the number of elements that come first in nums but are not equal to the value that we want to remove. And the way that we do that is first assign k to be equal to 0, and then you go through the numbers in num. So for num in nums, if num is not equal to the value that we want to remove, then we want to increment the k by 1, else we can just break. As soon as we are done with this, we can go ahead, return the k as the question wanted us to. Go ahead and run this. So as we can see, all test cases have passed. Then submit this. We can see that the answer is accepted. The time complexity of this algorithm is O of n, and that is because with this while loop, we go through the number of elements in nums, and then with this for loop as well, we basically do the same thing. So maybe O of 2n, but then ends up being simplified to O of n. So the space complexity is O of 1, and this is because we don't store any extra space that grows with the number of elements in nums. We just store specified values over here as control variables. That's it. This is my solution for Leetcode 27, remove element, and I would attach the solution to the description.